Good evening. Welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo. I am the State Section Director for MUFON-LA. We have a very, very interesting program tonight. I'm sure you're all waiting for this presentation. It's on a topic that a lot of people think maybe it happens, maybe it's real. Some people think, nah, it can't be real. It's impossible. But we have somebody tonight, and she's not the only researcher who have uncovered evidence in their own professional practices that point to the reality of what our speaker is going to talk to you about tonight. Her name is Barbara Lamb. She's been in this field for 30 years. She's a psychotherapist, a regression therapist, and a hypnotherapist. And in her regression work, some 30 years ago, she came across some interesting repeating patterns, something that her patients were telling her. And different patients were telling her the same thing. And she started to follow that line of investigation, and it took her in a direction she probably wasn't prepared for. And tonight she's going to share with you some of her travels down that road, and some of her experiences, and some of her knowledge. I'd like you to put your hands together, give a warm welcome to Barbara Lamb.
As Steve said, I have done years of regression therapy work as part of my therapy practice, which is out in Claremont, California, about 30 miles roughly east of here, easy to get to. And I was doing regression therapy in the 1980s, and a lot of that therapy took us to experiences that people seem to be having in previous lifetimes. But eventually, people started to come, and they were talking about waking up in the middle of the night and having strange beings there, having an unusual light come into the room, or an unusual light following them if they were driving a car or if they were outside walking or whatever, and even in residential areas as well as remote areas. And so I began realizing in some of these regressions that people were definitely having encounters with what we would call extraterrestrial beings. So since those years, way back about 1990, I have regressed nearly 990 people. That's a lot of people individually to experiences that they've had with extraterrestrials. And some of those people have been able to come for many regressions, 30 regressions for one woman, 40 for another, 50 for another woman, 60 regressions to extraterrestrial encounter experiences. And this is over a period of 10 years for some of those people who lived in Southern California and could keep coming for the regressions. So there's a tremendous amount that I have learned from their experiences. And I've had a few of my own encounters with unusual beings. Mine have been very, very positive, very educational. And many people's experiences with these beings are very positive, even spiritually uplifting. And some they receive as more frightening, more being kind of used or examined or intruded on in some way. So it's a very broad phenomenon. Many, many different types of beings come, and all of these beings seem to have their very own agenda. Well, in doing this work over all these years, it's come out many, many, many times that somebody discovers, the person I'm regressing, will discover that they have mysteriously somehow had a hybrid baby or a hybrid child. So I've been particularly paying attention to this because it just seems so preposterous, doesn't it? It seems so odd. I mean, how could we be combined and mixed reproductively with a whole different species that comes from who knows where, presumably out there in the universe somewhere? But I have concluded that it is true. There are many, many different hybrids that come from various species, and most of them, as far as I can tell, are not human enough to live here with us. So they probably live on a ship or maybe on another planet somewhere, but usually they don't live here. However, I've been discovering, especially in the past 5 or 6 years, that we do have people whom I think we could authentically call hybrids, and they do live here with us on Earth. And I'm going to show you a few pictures of people who do live here with us very effectively. They're wonderful people whom I know. In my opinion, they're wonderful people. And but they do have a lot of the extraterrestrial genetics in them, so we could call them a hybrid being. Well, I'd like to begin by just the thought that maybe we are all hybrids. I don't know if you've really thought about that before or not, but maybe we are. Maybe we were mixed with other kinds of beings a long time ago. It's very possible. Zecharia Sitchin's work in ancient Sumeria certainly makes that point very strongly, and so do many others. And I've learned in this work too that so many beings from different planets, maybe even different galaxies, who manage technologically to come here, they're very interested in planet Earth, and they're very interested in human beings. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is because a being from, let's say, planet Sirius, to use an example, knows that some of the people here, maybe all of us, are a mixture of early human and Sirian beings. And that seems to be true for many of these groups, that they pay attention to and visit people who are partly constituted of their type of being. So this history of possibly being hybrids, all of us, it goes way back, maybe 275,000 years, according to some estimates. So, this is not a new phenomenon. Well, we wonder too, how can this happen? We hear about the law in the universe, the law of non-interference, and that there seems to be a galactic federation of many different kinds of species out there, and they have laws like we have laws, they have principles, and so why would they allow some of their members, some of their types of extraterrestrials, to do a hybridization program with us? Well, there are reasons given to that, and these reasons come from a lot of the regression work that I do. And so it has been told to some of my people that a higher council among the galaxies gives permission for this hybridization program with humans because, a very important reason, it is known that the hybrid program here with us helps to save that species, which would otherwise be becoming extinct. Also, another reason why permission is given for this is that humans, whether they realize it or not, give permission to participate in extraterrestrial encounters and even the hybridization program. Now, people tend not to know, they don't tend to remember that they gave permission, but that seems to be primarily because before they are incarnated in this lifetime, before they're even conceived in this lifetime, there is a very conscious state of being. I call it the soul or the spirit state of being. And people, we all have done this, whether we remember it or not, at least I think we all have done this, that we've gone through sort of a planning stage before coming into this lifetime. And in that planning stage, when we're just a spirit, we don't have a physical body yet, and won't for a little while, but we get together with other spirits who are sort of guides, and we go over some of the main things that we're going to be working on or experiencing in this lifetime that we're about to be conceived into. And in that planning state, it happens with so many of the people I've regressed to the why me question, that they do give permission to other spirits who come into that session, extraterrestrial spirits, we would call them. And those spirits ask the spirit of the person who's about to be incarnated if they would cooperate with them in this lifetime that they're about to go into. And again, it turns out that this person whom I'm working with, or any of these people, have given permission in that soul state. But just like all the other things that we agree to before we come into this incarnation, we tend to forget that. You know, we grow up in our mother's wombs, we're born, we go through infancy, toddlerhood, childhood, teenage years, adulthood, etc. And we may not even consciously remember these things. But it does come out in regression, which is very convenient and handy. So we wonder, why do we think that these reports of people having hybrid babies and hybrid children, why could they be considered true? Well, for one thing, the reports that these people have, in talking about what's going on in the events that they're regressing to, these reports have characteristics of real events. There are very, very detailed descriptions, and the person usually is exhibiting, in regression, an intense emotional impact from these experiences, sometimes even a traumatic impact. Anyway, they also experience a very intense physical impact during these experiences. And another important point is that psychological testing of these people who've been involved in the hybrid program, and this is true of any experiencer of extraterrestrial contacts, psychological testing of these people shows no mental problems, no emotional problems. They seem to have no indication of having had childhood sexual abuse or satanic ritual abuse, or they have no dissociative disorders. They're regular, normal, sane, natural people. And in my opinion, they're really, quote unquote, good stock. They're intelligent people, they're healthy people, they're strong people, they're likable people. We probably have some here with us in this audience today, people who experience these things. So nothing in these reports from people suggests that they are actually dreams, or that they're delusional, or they are made up fantasies. Also, these reports of the encounters and the hybrid program are often accompanied by unusual markings on the person's body. And the person, if it's a woman, might have a missing pregnancy. She might realize she's pregnant, even if she hasn't been with a man for a long time. So, of course, that's a startling kind of mystery. How could I be pregnant? And then she'll gestate that pregnancy for, about 2.5, maybe 3 months. And then suddenly one day she wakes up and the fetus is gone. And that pregnancy, usually by that time, would have been confirmed by a medical doctor. But then she and the doctor will say, well, what happened? And he'll say, you must have had a miscarriage. And she says, no, I would have noticed if I'd had a miscarriage. Well, you must have had an abortion. No, I didn't have an abortion. Well, then where is the fetus? We call that the missing fetus syndrome. So that happens with lots and lots of women, and these are all women who do experience extraterrestrial contact. And also these people have another commonality, and that is that they experience missing time. Perhaps they've had a sighting of a UFO, or maybe they haven't. Maybe they've been driving somewhere, and then suddenly it's 2 hours later and they're in their car on a different road. This kind of thing happens a lot. In fact, it happened with one wonderful person I know on the way to the UFO Congress in Arizona a couple of weeks ago, and also to the same person and his companion on the way back. So these things do actually occur. Well, we might wonder where hybrids live. Well, some hybrids, those who are what we call the early stage hybrids, and they could not possibly survive here on Earth, and they don't look and function enough like humans anyway, if they could survive here. So mostly they tend to live, it seems, on spacecraft their entire lives with the people who are, or the beings who are doing this hybrid program. And they live there with other hybrids and various types of extraterrestrial beings who seem to be working cooperatively together. Some of these hybrids, as far as we can tell, actually live on other planets in sort of a colony situation, and they're usually cared for by adult extraterrestrial beings. And, as we will get to eventually tonight, some are developed enough and human enough, enough of a proportion of them is human, that they live here on Earth and they integrate right into human society with us. We might ask which people are parents of hybrids. First of all, the person who's a parent of a hybrid would be having experiences with extraterrestrials, and probably all of that person's life. They would be people who are in the genetic family line amongst us humans, the genetic family line that the extraterrestrials are following from generation to generation. Or the parents might be people who used to be a member of the very race of beings who were doing the hybridization. That is, they would have in previous lifetimes have been a member of that race. This comes out in some of the regressions. Also, they might be the people who, as I mentioned a bit ago, have given the soul agreement to cooperate with the extraterrestrials in this life and help to have hybrid children. Or these people who have hybrid children, in some instances, are people who are actually hybrids themselves, whether or not they know that. And then people who are closely connected to a man who would be in a what we would think of as a secret government / in some cases military project here on Earth, a regular human man involved in one of those covert programs. And in that program, they're experimenting with creating hybrids with extraterrestrials and studying those hybrids. So let's think about which races of extraterrestrial beings do hybridization. There probably are more than the ones that I know about, but I'm mentioning the ones that I know about from my own regression work with people. First of all, we have the gray beings. These are the ones that seem to be heard of the most by us humans here on Earth. Zeta Reticuli being. And they do removal of eggs from women and sperm from men, and then that's combined. I'll get into more detail about that. And then reptilian beings seem to do, or at least some of them. I think that there is quite a variety of extraterrestrial reptilian beings, but some of them seem to be very interested in combining with us through actual direct sexual intercourse. By the way, as a footnote, I'm going to say this is an X-rated lecture. The most X-rated lecture that I've ever heard in a MUFON group, so hopefully that's okay with you. And again, this information comes from the work that I've actually done directly with people. Then there are some human-like races. They look very, very much like us. And there's quite a series of those beings who have regressed and done hybridization with some of my people. And they give reasons such as, quote, "You are helping to save our race." And so they make these hybrids with humans who were originally, in previous lives, a member of that race. And then we probably all heard of the Pleiadian beings, and there are quite a number of different groups of Pleiadian beings because there are several, 7 plus more of the Pleiadian planets that we know about. So in the planet Alcyone, these beings seem to live between the 3rd and 4th dimension. They're a little bit faster in frequency, a little bit higher in frequency, higher in consciousness than we tend to be. And they, when they combine with humans, produce highly evolved, conscious, spiritual hybrid children with us. And these Pleiadian beings from Alcyone, they look very human, they're very attractive. It has been told to 1 or 2 of my experiencers that these beings can live 400 years easily. Wouldn't that be something? And they are human enough so that they can go easily back and forth to Earth and then back to their planets. We also have reports of the Anunnaki being from the planet Nibiru that was so widely researched by Zecharia Sitchin. They did produce hybrids, and it is thought they still do. We have beings from Sirius B who do hybridization, and then the Essassani beings, who are very small beings, probably about 3 feet tall. They too, they themselves are hybrid beings, and they do hybridization with us. And these are very, very sweet beings, according to some of my people who've been taken by them many times. And hybridization happens with Metatron beings. So a little bit more now about the gray aliens. There seems to be, according to these regressions, an alliance between several species of extraterrestrials, all in that gray alien large grouping. And these gray beings tend to look quite similar to each other, although they can be various heights. Some of them would be 3 feet tall, 3.5 feet, 5 feet, or 7 feet, but they're all in that larger race. And they seem, many of these species of grays, to have similar agendas in many regards. And they have been reproducing by cloning for a few thousand years. A clone, and then a clone from a clone, and a clone from a clone. And they have been changed by major genetic engineering. And in that genetic engineering, they've done certain things, deliberately apparently, such as eliminating emotions. And we know about our emotions. They know about our emotions. They know that our emotions are wonderful in many, many ways, and they're horrible in many other ways. We have really an extraordinary mixture, when you think about it, of our range of emotions that we humans are capable of. And these gray beings have larger heads to accommodate their larger brains, which have evolved over millennia. And they have the reduced body size and reduced body mass, because the mental abilities, the cognitive abilities, the psychic abilities have been so much more valued by them. And some of these gray beings have genetic changes which help them in long space travel. And they've made some genetic changes which help them in living longer. But they have a big problem, and that is that their genomes over multi-thousands of years have been damaged. their genomes have been damaged by excessive exposure to radiation. And one of the ways they get that radiation is through long space travel. And they have been damaged too by warring, fighting with other species who might be quite different than they are. And they're damaged by the cloning for reproducing, and each round of cloning means that their DNA gets actually further damaged. So we also have green-skinned gray types who do hybridization, and they have sort of suction cup-like fingertips, and they gestate human experiencers' eggs from the ovaries, and they gestate them in their wombs. These beings actually have wombs, and then they mix the human woman's eggs with their DNA. And then when they take a human mother who has, shall we say, contributed these eggs, they frequently will ask the mother to place her hands on the extraterrestrial's abdomen, the ET who is carrying this hybrid baby. They like to have the human mother, the contributor of those eggs, send human energy to the fetus, because human energy is realized to be very different than the extraterrestrial energy. And we have Zeta beings. And these are wonderful beings. They tend to be about 5'7" or 5'8". And one of my clients used to be a Zeta being in several previous lifetimes, and then sort of volunteered to come here as a human. So naturally, she gets visited, taken for an encounter, many, many times, and she has all of this lifetime to be with them, to be studied by them, and even to work cooperatively with them as she used to in those previous lifetimes. So the Zeta beings were dying out. They had destroyed the surface of their planet. I hope we humans will learn from this and not ruin the surface of our planet. So when they did that, some of these Zeta beings went underground to live for a long time, and some of them went to other planets to live, and some stayed on the ships and spent their whole lifetime on one of those UFOs. And they wanted to develop their minds, and so their craniums became very large. In fact, they became too large to pass through their birth canals, and so they lost their ability to reproduce. And eventually, not wanting to die out completely, they began hybridization to save their race, to redo their race by being partly human. Then we also have the mantis beings. I'm very partial to them. Sometimes they're called insectoid beings, and these are very tall, very thin. They might be 8 feet tall or 9 feet tall. And I will show a picture of those when we get to the picture. And they have very, very long, thin bodies, long, thin arms, long, thin legs, huge eyes, like a praying mantis or a giant ant, sort of big, black, wraparound eyes. And so they can look kind of frightening and spooky, but actually, with any person I've regressed to an encounter with a mantis or insectoid being, these beings are really wonderful. They're kindly, they're loving, they're gentle with people. In fact, they're unconditionally loving and even playful. And they have a very high rank on the ships that they work on with other beings. Usually they have sort of a supervisory status or directorial, and in charge of what the other beings from different species do on the ship. And they take people from home, and they test them, not so much physically, but test them mentally and psychically. And they are mentors and guides for many of us human who experience them. And some of them have long-term, like lifelong relationships with the humans that they interact with. And they create hybrid children with humans. We also have the Nordics. A lot of us have heard about the Nordics because they're so very human-looking. They're usually considered by us humans to be highly attractive. They're tall, they often have blonde hair or brown hair, shoulder length, even if they're a male. And these Nordics can materialize and dematerialize. They can pass through walls. Actually, many of these beings can too. And the Nordics tend to be, they're not warm and cozy and loving necessarily with humans, but they're benevolent and they're friendly and they're helpful. And very often they will, on the ship, answer questions that the experiencer might have during an encounter. And they speak very philosophically about the different species, the galaxies, space, and how all of this works together. And some of these Nordics, even, we think, live among us, and they're not detected as extraterrestrials because they look so much like us, and they communicate verbally in words the way that we do, and they also communicate telepathically. So let's talk about the process of hybridization. The most frequent way that we hear about, I think, is that eggs are taken from a human female. And then these eggs are taken, and of course she's in an abduction experience of one type or another as this process happens. And then those eggs are mixed with sperm taken from a human male. That human male could very well be somebody she doesn't even know or doesn't even know exists. And then that material from the human male and the human female is mixed together on the ship by these extraterrestrials. And they're put in like a little tube or a little test tube sort of thing, or a petri dish, as we probably would if we were doing this process. And then that mixture is modified on the ship. That is, extraterrestrial genes are added. And then that mixture is implanted into the human female in another abduction, and she gets pregnant, and she goes to the doctor, and the pregnancy is confirmed, and she'll gestate that pregnancy for between 1 and 3 months, and then she's abducted again, and that fetus is removed from her. So she, as I said before, has one of those missing fetuses. The doctors, kind of scratch their heads and say, well, we can't say why this happened for sure, but sometimes the little fetus, little embryo, actually at that stage, will pull away from the lining of the uterus and will just get absorbed into the rest of the system. And maybe that does happen sometimes to people who have nothing to do with this kind of program. But that's not the case with what I'm talking about, because the woman just doesn't feel pregnant. Suddenly one day she wakes up, wow, I feel so different. And she'll go to the doctor again, and he'll confirm, well, you're not pregnant anymore, so what can we say? And so in that abduction, when it's taken, the material, that little embryo, is gestated in a glass container of special liquid, very akin, I should think, to our amniotic fluid that we have in our pregnancies. And that fluid seems to be full of special nutrients for the fetus to survive. And then that fetus gestates, grows to full maturity as a fetus in the tank, and then is born. That is, taken out of the tank and wrapped in swaddling clothes. I'll show you some pictures of this, and then raised there on the ship. Now, another method of hybridization is that these beings take eggs from a human female and they mix it with extraterrestrial genetic material, so there's no other human male or sperm involved, just the woman and ET genetic material, reproductive material, and then that is again planted in the female and gestated for 2 or 3 months, removed, etc., as I have just been talking about. Another method is that sperm is taken from a human male. And this is not a fun process for these males, at least the males whom I've regressed to this type of experience, and others who have reported this to me, because a device, a mechanical device, is placed over the penis of the male and extracts the sperm. And before that happens, usually, there is what we call the mind scan process, in which the person, the male, who's on the ship, lying down on a medical type table, will have a being right there, maybe an inch from his face, the eyes of one of the beings, these big black eyes, right there, looking, staring into his eye, going through the optic nerve and stimulating portions of the brain that create arousal. So with the mind scan, they arouse the person, and so that the sperm can be taken for their reproductive process. And then that is mixed with extraterrestrial genetics and put, into a female. And he may or may not know that particular female. So I want to go back for a moment to the removal of eggs from women, because this happens to so many women who experience these encounters. One of the methods is to penetrate the abdomen right near the navel, and they remove the eggs from the ovaries. And in cases like that, they frequently will leave a little triangular bruise mark on the abdomen right near the navel. I've actually seen those bruises on quite a number of people. They don't last a long time, but boy, you can definitely see that something unusual has happened there. Another method is to penetrate the woman through her navel and somehow suck or draw the eggs out of her ovaries. And a woman who's had that happen will wake up the next morning and notice that there's a little bit of dried pus right there, coming out of her navel. She might wonder, why? What did I do? I don't think I could have scratched myself severely during the night. And then the other way that typically happens is that they go up through the vagina of the woman into the ovaries and remove the eggs in that particular way. So back to the males and how they do this from the males. I mentioned the mechanical device that they use. And when that happens, sometimes we find out in the regressions, the extraterrestrials explain to the man, this is for a very important purpose. In other words, they're not just being mean to that man or sadistic. This is for a very important purpose. We have to do this. And then 3 or 4 months later, that man might be taken again and taken into a special room where he's shown one of these tanks with a fetus in it, and it will usually be pointed out, this is from your seed, this fetus. And the man may or may not have subsequent visits with that hybrid after it's quote unquote born from that tank of liquid. So he may see that fetus as a baby and as a toddler, a young child, an older child, teenager, and so forth. And another method for men is that an alien or even a hybrid female might come to him at night when he's asleep in bed and mount him, having aroused him, and then he comes to a full experience there, and she receives the sperm inside of her and leaves with that sperm inside of her. And sometimes, this has happened a couple of times, with men I've regressed to these experiences, the female alien when she's coming to be intimate with the human male, she projects a screen image around herself, and she can, in the screen image, look like a really gorgeous, incredibly exotic human female. So the man is definitely drawn to that. And then, but in the middle of their being together sexually, the screen image begins to fade, and then he's aware, oh my God, this is a strange creature, no longer looking like a really exotic, beautiful human female. So this happened to one of the men that I had been working with frequently in the 1990s. And this man used to originally, in his youth and young adulthood, he used to be a perfectly big, strong, strapping sexual male in a happy sexual relationship with his human wife here in Southern California. And then something happened. He didn't know what. He didn't even know that something had happened. And then he wasn't able to be sexual with his wife anymore for about 10 years until we did this regression work. And in that particular regression, he found that he had been taken from in back of a restaurant. He suddenly was moved to leave the restaurant with his wife and a group of friends and go out in the alleyway, go to the parking lot for a cigarette, supposedly, but when he was out there, he was taken. And in that particular experience, this gorgeous female came along. They were on a craft, and in the middle of the act, the image fade, and she was definitely a very unattractive, from his point of view, reptilian female. And that turned him off about sex for 10 years until, not a shame, his wife didn't like it either, I'll tell you. And but he was able to be okay with her after we found out why he had been traumatized and so set against having any kind of experience like that, even with his wife. So these things happen. It's amazing. Another method is that a human female will mate with a human male on the ship. And before that experience, she may not have ever seen that male before. But somehow these beings have a way of stimulating both of these beings so that they go ahead and have this experience. But just before ejaculation, these beings pull the human male and the human female apart, and then they catch his fluid in a receptacle and keep that, and then return the people back to their homes. Another way is a human female mates with an extraterrestrial male, no human male involved, or a human male mates with an extraterrestrial female, whether she's had that screen image for disguise or not. And then hybrid females and hybrid males, there are already hybrids, they often will mate with a human male or a human female, and that's part of adding more human component to whatever that offspring will be. And still another method, these all come from these regressions, that the eggs from a human female are implanted by the extraterrestrials into an extraterrestrial female, or in some cases implanted into a hybrid female on the ship. And then that being, the ET or the hybrid, will carry the fetus full term and give birth to that son or daughter, hybrid, the way that we do. And sometimes a human female is taken on a ship and artificially impregnated with material from a variety of extraterrestrial sources. So we could look at this as genetic splicing. And then she gets pregnant and comes back here to Earth and gives birth here on Earth the way that we normally do. And some of these people then are giving birth to these hybrid children. And then a human or an extraterrestrial male can come to Earth and impregnate a woman, and she'll remain here and give birth to a hybrid child. And sometimes those males who come here are considered by the person to be an angel, because sometimes they look very attractive or they have the screen image of being attractive. And if they come quite a number of times over a period of years, the woman gets used to it and it's a nice experience. And in some cases, the husband of the woman, I know several people for whom this was a typical thing, the husband might be in that bed here on Earth, sound asleep, unaware that this activity is going on, because these beings have this incredible way of switching off people. Any companion of someone who's having an extraterrestrial encounter is usually made totally unaware, as if in a really, really deep sleep. So they miss the whole event, except for one man, I regress way back in probably 1991 up in Wyoming, and he got to see what was actually going on, and that was, of course, a great surprise to him. So we go on with all these different ways. It's not just one way. And then a very important way, and this brings in the people I know whom I do believe and trust are hybrids living with us. And that is a human husband and human wife get pregnant and carry a regular pregnancy. She does. And during the pregnancy, the wife is abducted. And during that experience, an extraterrestrial feels around her abdomen, feels right over her womb, and then injects into her through the abdomen, through the wall of the uterus, and into the fetus, injects extraterrestrial DNA. And so that fetus is affected forever by that extraterrestrial DNA. And then that baby is carried full term and delivered the way that we do, and is raised here by that mother and father. And it might take quite a number of years. It might even be that that baby, that child, becomes adult before realizing, whoa, I'm really different in many ways than other humans. And they look into it, and with regressions or just memories of the parents, or particularly the mother, they will realize that this process has happened to them. So, of course, these children look very human, and they're raised as a totally human person. But they do have some different physiological features. So again, now I'm talking about the beings who are extraterrestrially influenced, but who live here with us. One of the differences that they have is that the tips of their thumbs tend to be wider than the tips of the thumbs of the rest of us. And their bone consistency is usually different. If that's tested medically, it's really quite different than human bone material. And these hybrids might have an extra organ in their body, or they might have a missing organ, or they might have an organ that isn't in the place where our organs are, but somewhere else in the body. Might even be up in the chest. A lower abdomen organ might be up in the chest. And of course, doctors don't understand this, but then usually they don't know about this hybrid program. They might have an extra rib or an extra vertebrate too. So in other words, they can go on functioning quite healthily, but they do have these differences. So a very interesting thing that I've come across in more recent years is that even women who have gone through menopause and or women who no longer have a uterus, maybe it had to be removed surgically, they, even without a uterus, can gestate a hybrid fetus. So in other words, they've considered themselves completely past childbearing ability, but they can have a hybrid child. And the reason is that the extraterrestrials place in the human woman an extrauterine gestational unit, which is some sort of a sac for incubating a fetus. And this sac is surgically placed near the uterus, or where the uterus has been removed, it will place it where the uterus used to be. Or this sac will be placed near an ovary, or even behind the bladder. And before placing this sac, these beings have to sort of clear a space in the woman's abdomen in order to accommodate this sac, which will hold a fetus. And so the woman might experience that for a few days as if there's a bloating somehow in her lower abdomen. And sometimes they'll even have a feeling that organs are somehow mysteriously being moved around in their reproductive area. And with this method, because it's not our usual way of getting pregnant, the woman doesn't produce the usual hormones that would show up on a pregnancy test. And then, eventually, this sac, very early in the process, maybe 2 months or so into gestation, this sac and the embryo are removed, usually before the woman detects it and realizes that she's pregnant and wants to have it surgically removed. She wants to have an abortion. So it's been indicated through these experiences that the extraterrestrials monitor the woman who has this extrauterine sac, and they monitor her thoughts, and they take action with her when she thinks about maybe she's pregnant, and if she's pregnant, maybe she should consider having an abortion, or even if she thinks about babies or implants somehow being put in her. And these beings can telepathically, mentally influence her not to really look into it and not to have an abortion. Another very interesting thing I ran into in my experiencer support group, which meets every month, and this is for people who really, we know, have had these experiences because they've done regressions with me. And this group has been going since 1994 and is still going strong once a month. Anyway, in discussing these kinds of things with some of the women in the group a few years ago, one woman said, you know, it's really weird, but I had a missing pregnancy, and then about 7 or so months later, I found that I was lactating. And lactation doesn't happen out of the blue. You know, it doesn't happen unless you're pregnant. And another woman said, oh, that's weird. Yeah, I had a missing pregnancy too. And several months later, I was lactating profusely. And I don't know why. The doctor said, well, that shouldn't be happening if you're not pregnant. So anyway, in cases like this, they have housed a baby for maybe a month and a half, 2 months or so, and then that fetus was removed, and any future lactation that would happen was stopped. But, 7 or 8 or 9 months later, these women were lactating, and they wondered if somehow the extraterrestrials helped them to produce that lactation, and they wondered if maybe they were being taken sometimes for nursing the hybrid baby after the baby would be taken out of the tank on the ship. And maybe, in some cases, they might even be nursing other hybrid babies that came from other women. So all of these unusual things seem to go on. So I'm going to go on now to the reasons given for hybridization. And that means these are reasons given during a regression, given to the person being regressed by the extraterrestrial beings who are doing that abduction and whatever the procedures are. Because people so often say, why are you doing this? What is this all about? And so these are some of the reasons that the beings have told my people in regression on that question, why are you doing this hybrid program? Why are you making hybrid babies and children? The most frequently heard reason given by the beings is that the hybrid program is to save their dying race. And they say things like, we have become too inbred. Our strand has been weakened. We can no longer reproduce. Our females are infertile, or they've been harmed by nuclear radiation and we can't produce. We can't keep our species going. And then here are some other reasons given to my people I've regressed. For these beings, they want to be able to stay on Earth longer than they normally would be able to. They want to be able to ease into human society. They see the Earth as a better place to live than their own planet. And some of them even want to be able to live here permanently. Another group of beings gave this reason, that they want to create hybrid offspring who, because they're partly human, would be able to be here and to fight off our Earth bacteria and our viruses because they're partly human. And another group said, we want our hybrids to be more substantial physically. We want them to be stronger, denser, more muscular, like you humans are, compared to us. Others have said they want to gain the component of emotion in their hybrid children, with the ability especially to care and to love and to feel compassion to others. Another group has said they want to be able to have their children, hybrid children, settle here when their planets are no longer able to sustain life. And apparently that is happening out there, as unfortunately it could happen here. And they want to create beings who can live here on Earth sometimes, and sometimes live on the other planet that they partially come from. And in that case, they might have to have minor adjustments made to them to go from living here to going and living there. And a reason has been given that these beings want to upgrade the human race, upgrade us by having hybrids, upgrade us with higher intelligence and with psychic skills and with group cooperativeness more than many humans have. They want to upgrade us by giving our hybrid children telepathic skills, psychic skills, greater perspective of the cosmos, a real interest and openness about other beings in the cosmos. And one group told my person in regression that they simply are doing scientific experimentation, and they pointed out that it's very similar to what we do. We don't necessarily make hybrids, but we certainly do a lot of scientific experimentation, don't we, on various animals for all kinds of different purposes, and we even do it with humans. Now, another group said that they create hybrids for perpetuating the human race in some form in case we destroy life on Earth. And then this hybrid race, partly us and partly them, could live on another planet if need be, or could live in a spacecraft and survive quite well by being part them and part us. Another group said that they do hybridization to create a superior new race that hasn't existed. And this new race would have the best of humans and the best of that kind of extraterrestrial. And another group of ETs said they do hybridization to upgrade the human race spiritually. And this tends to be done by higher, more spiritual types of extraterrestrials, which there are plenty of, I'm convinced. And then another group said they wanted to genetically re-encode us to live in more balanced ways. They would like our hybrid offspring to be less hostile, less greedy, less competitive, less warlike. And we know that we can be that way. So one of my clients was told by her extraterrestrials, quote, "You humans are in trouble. An electromagnetic catastrophe will happen to you on Earth, resulting from your negative technology that you've already created and you already use. And some of you in the human race, or that is your hybrid children, will continue to live elsewhere as hybrids." And some of them say they want their hybrid offspring to benefit from the vast resources that we have here on Earth. And they also say that they are breeding friendly ambassadors or go-betweens, that these hybrids, when they grow up, they would understand us human, because they're partly human, and understand that race, because they're partly that race. And so, because they understand both, they would be able to foster understanding between us humans and other extraterrestrial races. And they have said, more than one group, that by hybridizing children with us, they are preparing us for joining the intergalactic community which exists. And they have said hybrids will be able to stay on Earth and to help human abductees to rebuild civilization after we have enough Earth catastrophes such as nuclear destruction. Many of you are aware of wonderful Dr. John Mack of Harvard, psychiatrist and head of the psychiatry department there at Harvard, who did so much excellent abduction work with many people. And he said that after destruction of the Earth and destruction of humans, which could happen, hybrids will be placed in groups in many parts of the Earth to live as the beginnings of a new civilization with a new system and knowledge from another world. So, you know, it may be a very, very important program that's going on, whether we've really been aware of it or not. Now, women, different women react to being taken to meet their hybrid babies and their hybrid children of various ages in different ways. Some women are really appalled and horrified and want nothing to do with those hybrid babies, and especially when it's told to them that that baby is theirs. They may get to warm up a little bit over time when taken repeatedly to see that baby grow and develop, or maybe not. Some women feel quite neutral, and they do agree when asked to hold the baby. Okay, well, I guess I'd better do this. And it's not too bad for them. And some human women immediately love their hybrid baby when presented the baby on a ship, and they want more contact with them. Some of them ask the ETs whether they could bring that baby home and raise the baby here on Earth with their other children. And they're always told, no, the baby wouldn't survive here. And some people are so in favor of these hybrid babies and hybrid children who will grow up to be hybrid adults that they are really going out of their way to establish communities of interest for people who have hybrid children and have come to realize that, and just for people who are interested in this subject. For instance, there's two wonderful women here in Southern California. One, quite young, is Bridget Nielsen, who lives in Santa Monica, and the other is Sharon McCormick. These are just excellent, excellent human beings, in my opinion. And they're experiencers of extraterrestrial contact, and they know that they have quite a number of hybrid children. So they've actually created a website and a group. The website is www.hybridchildrencommunity.com, and they have different people contributing articles to that, and occasionally they run a workshop for people who think their children might be hybrids, or people who think they themselves might be hybrids, or people who are just interested in this phenomenon in a positive way. And they are actually trying to find a piece of land donated to them outside of Sedona, Arizona, for welcoming hybrids who allegedly are in a craft, hundreds of hybrid children of various ages, and they're about 1,000 miles above the surface of the earth, and specifically over Sedona. So there is some very positive response about this too. So I'm going to show some slides now, and you probably had plenty enough of looking at this title, I should think. Okay. So here's a wonderful picture from Daryl Anka and Kim Carlsberg of the left side there that you see is a human being, and the left side, or the right side, sorry, is an extraterrestrial being, and then she is holding a sphere with a little hybrid baby in it, a combination of the two. And here's a picture of a woman on a table, on a craft, extraterrestrial beings around her, and probably a hybrid being right over there to the left, bringing a rose, trying to comfort the woman who's been abducted, and from her has been removed, you can see in a glass tube, a little hybrid fetus. And then we have an extraterrestrial with the tube that I mentioned that will have that beginning of the reproductive product there, extraterrestrial genetics and human reproductive material. And you can see that this is a regular program with other tubes around. So here are two extraterrestrials and a tank, and in that tank is a hybrid fetus. Now, these fetuses are really paid attention to. There's always apparently a staff of extraterrestrial beings, monitoring, making sure that the fetus is okay, because these hybrid beings are extremely important to them, or they wouldn't even be bothering to do this program. So here's another tank and another hybrid floating in that fluid. And by the way, the fluid, which we would call amniotic fluid, seems to come from certain fluids from human females taken in abductions, and also it seems to come from cattle. So we wonder about our cattle mutilations. The cow genetics are very close in many ways to human genetics, and so taking the fluids, particularly the reproductive fluids, as we notice happens in cattle mutilations, that may be one of the reasons, or one of the ways in which they get the components for the amniotic fluid. So here's a little hybrid fetus, much bigger eyes than we would normally have, and an extraterrestrial being holding a sphere with a little hybrid baby in there. And we did see that one. And then we have something that many people report, that there's a whole room, or in this case it's a hallway, with a lot, almost like a grid work, all these different chambers built into the wall. Each one contains, like this one, a hybrid baby. So that baby has not yet come out of the tank, but will when mature enough. So then we have, here first of all is a baby in an incubation chamber, probably having been taken out of the gestation tank and wrapped in swaddling clothes, and is being watched over by, this is kind of a late stage hybrid, middle stage hybrid, early stage hybrid, or extraterrestrial. And then here in the wall we have these different compartments, each one with a hybrid baby that's been quote unquote born and is being cared for by these beings. And back to the gestation tanks, they're described in various ways by experiencers of this program. And so here we have these glass tanks sort of coming out of a central pole, and then there's the console or the monitoring equipment, which no doubt regulates the temperature, the constituent of the fluids, the nutrients, and so forth. So here we have a woman who's been taken and is being shown her hybrid child, and this looks like quite an advanced stage hybrid woman who's relating to her. So here we have one of these newborns, or at least in babyhood. You can see a little bit of whites in the eyes. The eyes are bigger in proportion than human eyes would be in a baby. And this one just has a scant bit of hair, thin neck, wrapped in the clothes. And here's a human hand, probably of the mother, having been taken to meet this hybrid baby. Now this is one of the women who looks pretty dubious, not at all happy, not at all sure to be presented with her hybrid baby, who's very thin, very weak looking. This seems to be typical, especially of the first generation hybrid being. So this is probably the type of being that has done this hybridization process with her. So she is holding the baby, but she doesn't look like she's really welcoming it. And then here is a bowl of some kind of steaming fluid, and she's been asked to feed that baby. So we're going to talk now about the early stage hybrids. So this would be the first generation between a human person and an extraterrestrial being. So in other words, this being is probably half and half alien and human. And this one, in the early stage, it's typical. They look more alien than they look human. Probably will grow up to be about 3.5 to 4 feet tall. And so often they're kind of thin and frail and listless looking, and they may have wispy straw-like hair at best, and over large heads, over large eyes, thin bodies, arms, legs, very large eyes, tiny ears, tiny nose, tiny mouth. This one actually is a little bit bigger than some, and only just a vestige, a suggestion of human genitals. And this type of being, here are some more of the early stage ones. They need the least amount of time in the human mother's uterus, and they need the least amount of time in the gestation tank on the ship. And in that tank, they're absorbed. They absorb nutrients right through their skin, which is a special kind of liquid around them in the tank. And they do need some love and nurturing from their human mother when she's abducted again, and they could never live on Earth. They always live on the craft, or maybe a different planet, and many of them have been dying during the first few months of their lives, and that's one reason why the hybrid program has continued for we don't really know how long, maybe even a few generations of humans. So this one, you can see some whites in the eyes, the very small nose, small mouth, eyes are larger than ours and more almond-shaped, early stage, and another one. This one's getting to be a little bit more human-like, but definitely not quite. And this one, this was a little girl that kept appearing during abductions to the co-author of my book, which is called Alien Experiences. I have a copy in the back of the room and some order forms, if any of you would like a copy. And Nadine, who was abducted all of her life, many, many, many times, we did many regressions to her experiences, she was able to remember the look of this little child. And whenever she'd be abducted, years ago, this little child would just sort of be there looking kind of forlorn and very sparse hair, no expression on her face. And then, just a very few years ago, in other or more recent abductions, Nadine would see this being, who apparently is that child having grown up more recently. And again, the blank expression, the unusual eyes, no hair in this case, and that being would just always be there in Nadine's abductions. And very often in her abductions, she would be sort of trained and taught and tested, mentally tested, by one of the mantis or insectoid beings. And this one just always was there. So Nadine has promised to try to get to know her better in subsequent abductions. So here, this being drawn by the woman who features in one of Bud Hopkins' early books about abductions, so she would have a very difficult time passing here, wouldn't she? Because of the shape of the head and the eyes being overly large and the large eye cavities. And some of these early stage ones look similar to this type of being. These pictures I'm showing you are drawn by various people who either had these experiences themselves or really did some forensic artistry work, catching the very detailed descriptions of people who had experienced these beings and rendered them as closely as they could. So now we're showing a second generation of hybrids. In other words, the original hybrid then combined reproductively with another human. So there's a bit more proportion of human. So you've got more hair, although thin and sparse, bigger eyes, looking a little bit more human, more of a nose, more of a mouth, and they tend to be very, very slim. And then a middle stage or second generation hybrid baby, looking in many ways like a human baby, except for the color. Sorry, the color is off. Eyes with very large black area, irises. No real delineation between the iris and the pupil, but there is some whites in the eyes. And a middle stage hybrid. Now this would look like quite a sweet human child, wouldn't she, except for the eyes. I mean, what if you encountered a child like this out in a pram or a stroller or something, and wow, I mean, that would be quite startling. So these middle stage beings might possibly visit here for a very, very brief period of time, but probably wouldn't be able to stay here very long. Here's a hybrid, middle stage hybrid, looking somewhat human except for the eyes, and a hybrid child, probably a child of hers. And then this little boy, nice kid, little tiny mouth, big eyes, ears are getting a little bit bigger, some more hair, but the cranium is kind of a giveaway too, and the total lack of expressiveness. He would not fare very well here. And this middle stage being, big dark eyes, a little more hair, thin, and very often my clients report that these hybrids are wearing just a very simple little dress, never any style variation, any decoration, color variation or anything. They just seem to dress them as simply as they can. And this one too, now she's getting to be more human looking and has a better head of hair, and definitely different. And yet, can't you see some similarity between her and that type of being that she was probably hybridized from? So she looks quite human, but these eyes are really bigger than ours. And again, the lack of facial expression. And this little fellow, again, that very simple little shift sort of item of clothing, and no expression but some hair. And this one, a little bit what I would call kind of unnerving looking eyes, and yet the face looks fairly human, doesn't it? And lots of hair in this particular case, but she would be middle stage and probably not able to fare here very well. And the same with this fellow. Now he's got more whites in his eyes. He's got a head that would be too tall for us. Very, very flat ears, very small mouth. He would be that middle stage. And then, this is so typical that people who experience this sort of thing are taken to a setting, it seems to be on a craft, like this woman, and that she is introduced not only to other extraterrestrials, but to hybrid children. And this one is being presented to her as her hybrid child. And fortunately, if we want to look at it that way, this woman is being receptive to receiving and to knowing that hybrid child. Another middle stage hybrid looking very human in lots and lots of ways and attractive, but the eyes don't have whites in them. And middle stage also, look at the size and the shape of the heads, much more pronounced than ours. They do have these two whites in the eyes and round irises and pupils, much more of a nose and a mouth, but they probably wouldn't fare totally well here. And these are all different artist renditions from these detailed descriptions. And Katarina Wilson did this one of a hybrid she kept seeing with the big almond eyes, a different kind of pupil, but you just wouldn't think that she would be human quite. And then this woman, an adult hybrid, being related to by the little ETs, doesn't look, does it, like she would have been hybridized from these beings, but if she's enough generations down the line with enough human component in her, that certainly could be possible. And then this one, big eyes, simple clothing, not happy. And this one, now this boy looks, I think on first glance, maybe you could think, oh yeah, he's a regular human boy, but you look carefully and you realize, no, not quite. The eyes aren't unusually large, but they're not really like ours. But if another generation came from him, combining with a female human, that offspring would be successful here. And then again, the middle stage hybrid, the sparse hair, more human-like eyes, coming along, but probably not quite suited to be here. And this one with the black eyes. And this one, definitely, I think we might look a little oddly at this one if he were amongst us, and he probably wouldn't be. And this one, she looks quite human, I would say, but the eyes are really, really bigger, and again, that lack of human expression. And this being, in this case, very white, like paper white, and blue eyes, but they're different. They tilt up. They're kind of almond-shaped, actually, but he's got some human-like features and at least a little bit of hair. And this one, again, the black eyes. Incidentally, there are some reports, some of you might have heard of black-eyed children showing up here on Earth. And I don't think anybody, including myself, really knows what those children are, where they come from, or what they want here. But it's a bit unnerving for people who are meeting them. Middle stage hybrid, now he just has that extraterrestrial typical indentation for an ear and no ear flaps. In many ways, he has human-like features, but the black eyes, much taller cranium. And another one, again, the large cranium seems to go with the beings in this middle stage. He's got some whites in his eyes, probably his hybrid offspring, combined with another human, might be able to be here. And then we've got male hybrid, and very typically on the craft, people see these hybrids that seem to have like a butch haircut, sort of almost like bristles standing up on the top of their head. And they're usually tall and thin and have no expression, and a hybrid female, and another one, hair, but they would look a little strange if you thought they were human. And this one too, again, the very sparse hair, some whites. This one's looking quite a bit more human, probably wouldn't be able to be here. And this one too, with two different types of extraterrestrial species. She might be one of those who was created by genetic splicing, possibly. And then we have these extraterrestrials, different types, different heights, and a hybrid child. And you can see a little extraterrestrial hand here touching the shoulder. There seems to be, maybe not the way we do it, but there seems to be a caring and certainly a protecting and a guiding done of these children who were so very precious to them. Still middle stage, she's got more hair, but it's kind of straw-like and unruly, larger eyes, getting to be more human-like in some of her features. And this being very similar to another one I just showed about that. And then a woman I regressed in Houston, Texas, she drew a picture of her teenage hybrid daughter, and she felt very closely related to this hybrid daughter. The daughter lives on a craft, so she sees her only there. She would love to have been able to raise her here. So this girl was about 16 years old a few years ago, very few years, maybe 6 years or so ago, when I regressed that woman. But she was very, very fond of her, and they related only telepathically when this woman was taken on the ship. And this being a nice example, I think, of a middle stage hybrid. Also a nice example of what some people report as seeing beings who have a glow around them. They're sort of shining and glowing. And this one, I don't think that would be real comfortable to bump into him. But and he probably isn't here anyway. Very interesting eyes with a reverse black around the edges and lighter in the middle. And this one too. Some of my clients have had experiences on the craft with what they call widow-peaked people. And I didn't realize when I was regressing one man repeatedly to experiences with these widow-peaked people, he said, who looked quite human, but not entirely. And I didn't realize at the time when we were doing those regressions a few years ago that maybe that widow-peaked woman he kept seeing and a widow-peaked man actually might have been a hybrid, as I think that one is. And the little child again with the ETs. And look at this one. I mean, he looks quite human in many ways, but his eyes are completely blue. At least he has dark pupils, the way that we do, and no hair. He probably would not do too well here. And this one, she's at least got some expression about her. Spindly hair, unusual big eyes, but she's got more nose and more mouth. And this one too, look at the eyes. I've met one person here on Earth who has eyes that spread out sideways much more than they are tall up and down. So this fellow, if you saw him on the street, which you probably wouldn't, because he's middle stage, but you might think he's human until you really look in his eyes. Now, this is one example by the artist Casara, who lives in the valley here. She's done, dozens and dozens and dozens of drawings of extraterrestrials described in detail by people who have had abductions and have seen these types of beings. But I put this hybrid in, this reptilian in for a reason, because there is such a thing as reptilian hybrid beings. Look at this fellow, for instance. Some humanness about his face, but certainly a reptile type of texture, and the pupils of these beings seem to be more oblong, vertically. Now we're going to skip over these reptilian types and focus on this little guy who is a reptilian human hybrid, but he would not be able to pass here on Earth. And an adult reptilian human hybrid, again with very different skin texture, eyes are getting a little bit more human looking, and some of the features, but that neck and the skin texture definitely are a giveaway. And then this reptilian hybrid baby, green, you can see kind of cracked mottled skin, which is not nearly as vivid as the reptilian skin, but certainly isn't really human-like. And notice the vertical slits for pupils, which is very typical of reptilians and of some of the reptilian human hybrids. And look at the skin texture of this guy, and definitely different feet and hands. Looking pretty fit, he can probably be pretty active. In this case, I'm very familiar with one woman who did here in Southern California, who did many, many regressions with me over a period of about 12 years or so. And this was her reptilian husband. In other words, she had lots of encounters with him from early childhood, and they were very pleasant, even though he looked a bit odd to her. But on the craft, he would read her stories and play games and become very friendly. And then when she became sexually mature, they started combining sexually, and that happened many, many, many times on the ship. And she would say, she said in one regression, "Why is it that every time I'm brought here, you come in and you want to have sex with me?" And he said, "Well, that's because I'm your husband." And she said, "You can't be my husband. My husband's back home in Southern California." And he said, "Yes, that's your Earth husband, and I'm your space husband." So sometimes they would get together sexually on the ship, and sometimes they would get together when he would come to her home, and her husband was always in the same bed, sleeping but switched off, totally unaware of what was going on, but the coupling would happen right there. Well, out of that, she figured she probably had quite a bunch of hybrid children, and lo and behold, one day we did a regression, and she had just had an experience the night before, and so it was really fresh and new. That's always exciting. And on that occasion, on the ship, she again was with her reptilian husband, and he introduced her to these people who were her adult hybrid sons, with his being the father. So this was one of those missing fetus experiences. And this one was age 34, and this one age 36, according to the father. And you can see some humanness, but you've got the vertical slits, you've got the unusual skin texture, but not as pronounced as his. And my client, this woman, was so proud of them. Wow, these are really big, strong, sturdy beings, and they're partly me. She was actually quite thrilled. Now here are two little, either hybrids or extraterrestrials, and I suspect they're hybrids, in a city mixing along with people in the crowd, and it seems like only this woman is really wondering that she's really noticed them. I mean, wouldn't you do a double take if if you were walking along and somebody appeared like this? You're trying to hide, obviously, but they're here amongst us, at least temporarily. Now, many of you have probably gone to the channelings of Bashar, a hybrid, he says, from our future, and he gives messages through the channel Darrell Anka, who's here in the valley. And he gives very, very interesting, powerful information. How many of you have ever heard Bashar? I can sort of see you to some extent. Okay, quite a number of you have. Wonderful. And so Bashar channeled through Darrell Anka, who's an artist anyway, fortunately, and as well as a channel, and channeled this being. He wanted people who heard his messages through the channeling to know what he looked like. And so his eyes are a bit different, and he describes himself as a gray alien from our future. So that one we could certainly call a hybrid. And then I mentioned the mantis beings, the insectoids, and so here's a mantis being with a very large eyes that kind of wrap around the side of the head, very, very long arms, very tall, very thin. They don't look loving, but they are. They're just excellent. And here is a real live woman whom I know, and we'll be knowing better. She's coming out here, by the way, at the last weekend in March. Is going to be a wonderful conference in Irvine, at the Temple of Light in Irvine. Saturday and Sunday, I think it's March 29th and 30th, I think are the dates. Anyway, that last weekend. And I'm going to be one of the speakers about spiritual extraterrestrials rather than hybrids. And this woman, Fran Harris, she's given me permission to share about this publicly. And she is a combination of human and mantis beings, having come from the planet Esticon. And so she's going to be there with us, and she'll probably say some things in the conference as well. And a very excellent woman, and her reason for being here, her mission, shall we say, as a hybrid living with us, is to work with star children and star seed adults, helping them, encouraging them in developing their psychic skills, their intuition, their telepathic skills, their group consciousness, and they're wanting to really help humanity and helping Earth. So here's an extraterrestrial of a slightly different type and a hybrid baby. So we're now in the category with Fran, living here a full lifetime with us. And this baby, the late stage hybrids who can live here. So probably these beings are about the 5th generation of hybrid, having mixed each generation with another human, so that the proportion of human to extraterrestrial keeps increasing with each generation, but there's still the extraterrestrial genetics in there. So here's another one. And these two boys who are here on Earth, they believe that they come from this type of extraterrestrial being. You can see, a little bit of likeness there, but here they are, except that their eyes are dark. Now, I showed you the picture of the reptilian. Here is a reptilian-human hybrid boy, green eyes, sort of vertical pupils, and definitely a vertical slit for pupil, as well as the green irises, and just faintly you can see behind him a reptilian being. with the reptilian eye. And another one from a Lyran being, and she looks fairly human. Now this is a real photograph of a real hybrid, the daughter of Lisa Romanak, who's the wife of Stan Romanak. They live in Colorado, and they have written about 4 or 5 books about their experiences. They both have hybrid children, and this hybrid daughter of Lisa's showed up at a conference in New Mexico a year or 2 ago. It might have been last year. And she looks so similar to Lisa. I've got to get a picture from Lisa of how she looked as a child of this age. So she was there. She showed up in the audience at that conference, and somebody fortunately took a picture of her. So that's a real hybrid. As far as we know, she doesn't live here, but she's human enough that she can visit for at least limited periods of time here and there. So here we have extraterrestrial being and a hybrid young child looking at another hybrid baby. And so very often these hybrids, are very friendly, very comfortable with the extraterrestrials that they are partly comprised of. Now this one, you might wonder about the eyes, but otherwise she could be here. And a late stage hybrid, again, a little bit exotic looking, a little bit different looking, but lots of hair, eyes are not too much bigger, features very much like a human, and she could definitely pass for a human. And these two beings, these look very, very similar to the Nordic beings. Maybe the Nordic beings are hybrids for all we know, but here are two that could live here or be here. And this is a likeness of the type of woman here with us who is a late stage hybrid and living a whole lifetime with us. Eyes are a little bigger, very luminous, otherwise looking very human. And this one could be here okay. Plenty of hair. Eyes are not too larger. But again, it seems like a lot of these current living with us hybrids don't have a whole lot of expression. So here we have the extraterrestrial, and I would think a middle stage hybrid and a late stage hybrid who could very well be living with us. So this is kind of like a family portrait, shall we say. And this being could be here with us. You might think, whoa, she's a little bit unusual looking, but she'd probably do well. Now, a lot of the hybrids who live with us are model perfect, model attractive, whether male or female, usually tall, slim, very balanced features, very attractive features. This late stage hybrid, usually, now her eyes are not especially big, but they have that kind of vivid look. And then a male late stage hybrid, not much expression, head is a little bit taller, but he could definitely be living a whole lifetime here. And this one, late stage hybrid, lack of expression, although I don't want to characterize all of them as having no expression, but many of them do. Now, some of you may know this wonderful woman who lives in Arizona, Cynthia Crawford. She's given me permission to show this and talk about her. She's one of those hybrids. She actually found out, definitely from her father. She's a hybrid by virtue of the fact that the mother and father became pregnant, human, but the father was part of this, some sort of secret, covert government, maybe military project, experimenting and wanting to know what would happen if you combined extraterrestrial genetics with human genetics. So the father, unbeknownst to the mother, actually slipped her a drug in her cocktail, and then she was abducted, and during the abduction, a female being, injected her through the wall of her abdomen and her womb into Cynthia when she was a fetus in her mother's womb. So that's how the extra genetics came to be in her. And then the mother carried her full term, gave birth in our regular human way. Now, Cynthia has very vivid eyes, a little bit larger in my experience of looking at people's eyes here. And she knows that she's a hybrid. Her father finally explained it to her. She has wider thumbs at the tip of the thumb. She has a totally different bone constituency than human. She has a different blood type. She has a different body temperature. And her mission is to channel the sculpting of various kinds of extraterrestrial beings. And these sculptures, she says, have the energy, like this one right here, the energy of that type of being who channeled her doing the sculpting in the first place. She is going to be at that Cosmic Reunion conference the last weekend in March down in Irvine at the Temple of Light. Anyway, she's an excellent human, and a lot of people who see her table full of sculptures feel very drawn to one particular one and will buy it and take it home. And they say that they have all kinds of experiences that happen, such as telepathic messages coming through the sculpture to them, and they're very pleased actually with that sort of thing happening. Now here's another one, a woman I met at a UFO conference back in 1990, and she showed me scoop marks and all kinds of markings on her body from her abductions. She knew she was a lifelong experiencer of extraterrestrial encounters, and lo and behold, it turns out, I didn't know it for years, but she has a lot of extraterrestrial in her. She is actually a late-stage hybrid, and she's one of those people who is tall, blonde, statuesque, very attractive, very outgoing. In fact, she's had her own television program interviewing people for years, and an excellent person, very bright person, very psychic, very nice to know. And this one, long hair, here amongst us. And this one, we notice the eyes, a little bigger than most of ours, and very vivid, and not so much facial expression. And this guy, so there are hybrids, I think, in all human races. All human races have people who've been abducted, as far as we know, and hybrid offspring in many cases. Now, I say reptilian hybrid, look at her eyes. She's a very attractive woman, I think most people would agree. And in this case, she's got two earth reptile creatures sitting on her shoulders, and she's probably perfectly comfortable with that. So she's probably a reptilian human hybrid. And an Asian young man who is a hybrid of one of those species. And again, kind of a full-on view of the reptilian male with the vertical slits, roundish eyes, but vertical slits. And this woman who lives in Kentucky, she claims to be a reptilian human hybrid. And I show these pictures because she says that when she's experiencing vivid emotion of any kind, in this picture she's actually performing in a play, and she's excited to be performing in the play, and perhaps even singing. And so here she is looking fairly normal, but something's beginning to happen here. Her eyes are becoming much more dark. You don't see whites. And the skin is beginning to change color and even becoming a coarser, more bumpy texture. So she's shape-shifting into the reptilian portion of her hybridness and this streak coming down here. And here's another picture of her. Her eye would normally look more like this, a round iris and round pupil, but every once in a while it shifts and it becomes more oblong and more vertical, as is emphasized right here. Now this particular woman, Gia Bathory, and she has given me permission to talk about her. She does quite a lot of painting, and she has painted here a reptilian landscape that she says that she has visited, different kinds of structures than we have. And she has frequently visited a reptilian temple. I don't know where that temple is. I'm not sure that she knows exactly, but it's not right here. But it's a huge facility with enormous columns. You can see she's depicted herself as a child in this enormous room, and around the columns are serpents. The serpents, apparently, that symbol is used a lot by reptilian beings. So here's this huge room with a large stairway going up to something like a throne and a glowing being at the top. So here's just a close-up picture. She's getting a little bit closer as a child. But in other words, she's been taken back to the reptilian part of her heritage that she is partially composed of. Now here's another woman living here with us, attractive woman, doing this shape-shifting thing where the slit in the eye is vertical here and a slightly different color in the eye compared to the round iris and round pupil that we're familiar with in this eye. And so here's all this rough, bumpy, reptilian-like skin texture as she's going through a shape-shifting process. I think it's just fascinating. And then this woman, most likely a late-stage reptilian hybrid, or certainly representing that look. And this is very, very similar to the being that I reported a while back of the man seeing this exotic-looking female approaching him on the ship for sex. And then in the middle of the act, she shape-shifted, or the screen image faded, and she looked like a human being. But this is a similar kind of look to that exotic female that was presented to him. So I'm finishing the pictures now, just with a cover of my book, co-authored by Nadine Lalich. I've got a sample copy in the back. I've got some order forms if anybody would like to order them. And final concluding thing, two things. One is that I'll give the website, my website, which is www.barbaralam, and then the initials MFT, that's for Marriage and Family Therapist.com. So BarbaraLamMFT.com. Okay, now the last thing I want to say is that, as Steve had mentioned, I'm a crop circle researcher, and we'll be giving a crop circle lecture at the Santa Barbara MUFON this coming Saturday, March 23rd. And also every year I lead a crop circle tour group to crop circles in England. And that is a wonderful adventure. It's just amazing. It's fun. It's active. We go into quite a number of crop circles and visit the ancient sacred sites. So we get to really experience them. Such an easy, wonderful way to see crop circles if you've ever wanted to see crop circles. So I've got some information about that at the table in the back of the room. You've been a great audience, and I want to thank you very much. Thanks for sticking with it.